Good evening, everyone. How are you all? So I'm also good, thank you. हाँ, कुछ ऐसे ही हुआ था, ठीक है, ठीक है. It's a minor thing. So, it's fine. So last class we discussed about the origin and evolution of Earth, geological time scale, and interior of the Earth. So regarding origin, we know that Earth originated along with the other planets of solar system. So most widely accepted theory is the nebular hypothesis. So regarding evolution, it happened in multiple different stages. The evolution of Earth's interior, like the evolution of the interior layers, density separation, condensation, and then differentiation. So you should remember these terms as it is. Okay? So during which the entire internal layers got settled and separated, so as per the density, temperature, and the mineral composition. So that is how the entire Earth's internal layers, like, so multiple different layers evolved, which we called as the crust, mantle, core. So however, in the atmosphere, the early primordial atmosphere was removed by the solar winds because it was made up of very light elements, as well as it was very thin in terms of thickness. So it was very easily washed away. Then the next subsequent atmosphere was formed by the release of gases from the Earth's interior through the process of degassing and volcanic eruptions, which released large quantity of gases, and so including water vapor. Water vapor is also a gas. So these gases surrounded the Earth, forming a new atmosphere. So at that point of time, the atmosphere consisted mainly of carbon dioxide, water vapor, sulfur, nitrogen, then methane, and few other minor compounds. But oxygen was very less at that point of time. So gradually the water started to condense. As the water started to condense, it also brought down carbon dioxide by mixing it with the water. So with a decrease in carbon dioxide, more cooling happened. With more cooling, more precipitation happened. With more precipitation, more carbon dioxide was brought down. So like this, the over a period of time, the precipitation happened for like millions of years, and all this water filled the oceans. So by then, it was around 4,000 million years ago when the oceans were completed, and the Earth's atmosphere was having lesser proportion of carbon dioxide, but oxygen bhi bahut kam tha. So gradually the life evolved in the ocean as unicellular, non-photosynthetic microorganisms, and then gradually it became photosynthetic, and through the process of photosynthesis it released oxygen, and that oxygen first initially filled the ocean, then started to flood the atmosphere, right? So gradually changing the overall composition, making the conditions favorable for life to exist. So that is evolution. So after that we studied about the geological time scale. So over a period of time, how exactly the Earth's condition changed, and what are the major events happened. That is what is our geological time scale. Geological time scale is divided into 4 major eons. Each eon is divided into era. Each era is divided into period. Period is divided into epoch. Epoch is divided into age. Okay. What are the 4 major eons? Hadean, Archean, Proterozoic, Phanerozoic. Okay. So कोशिश करो रिवाइज करने के लिए. So without seeing whatever you had written, कोशिश करो जितना रिकॉल हो सकता है देखते हैं. Hadean, Archean, Proterozoic, together they are called as Precambrian. Okay. Hadean, majorly the events were formation of oceans, formation of interior layers, right? Archean, the evolution of life, non-photosynthetic and then photosynthetic. So Proterozoic, soft-bodied marine organism. Phanerozoic, much more advanced form of life, which is divided into Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. Cenozoic. Paleozoic is divided into Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, बिना देख के बताइए, Devonian, Carboniferous, Permian. Cambrian, marine invertebrates. Ordovician, first fish. Devonian, first plant. Silurian, first plant. Devonian, amphibians. Carboniferous, first reptiles, and as well as coal formation. Permian, domination of reptiles. Mesozoic is divided into Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. Triassic is diversification of reptiles. Jurassic is dinosaurs. Cretaceous is extinction of dinosaurs. So that is what is Mesozoic. Cenozoic is divided into tertiary and quaternary. So tertiary divisions पता है किसी को? Paleocene, Eocene, Oligocene, Miocene, Pliocene. Okay, then comes Pleistocene and Holocene. So that's part of quaternary. So tertiary events: evolution of mammals, evolution of flowering plants, and then Himalayas, and then apes. So evolution of human beings, Homo sapiens, happened in quaternary, Pleistocene. So evolution of the modern man as a cultural evolution, it happened in Holocene. Okay. So quaternary is when the last ice age ended. By the end of quaternary, Holocene is the beginning of the new era, new epoch. Holocene is divided into Greenlandian, North Grippian, Meghalayan. Good. Okay, Greenlandian, North Grippian, Meghalayan. We are currently in Meghalayan, belonging to which epoch? Holocene. So which period? Quaternary. Which era? Cenozoic. Eon? Okay, good. So we had also discussed about the third topic, interior of the earth. So in this, we discussed about the different sources which are used for obtaining information. So all these sources are classified into direct and indirect sources. Direct sources involve deep ocean drilling and mining, volcanic eruptions. Indirect sources include density studies, seismic studies, temperature and pressure studies, and then meteorites. ठीक है. ठीक है. Any doubts here? Because it is not from inside the earth. Meteoroids are not from inside the earth, that's why it is indirect source. So it is classified based on whether we are able to get the material from inside the earth or not. Fine? Any other doubts? This is more of a topic of science and technology. So gravitational anomalies are deviations in the expected values of gravity, which we observe in space, particularly near to very heavy bodies. Okay, so near to black hole or due to some other phenomena which happens in space. So more of science and technology. Any doubts? ठीक है. Degassing is release of gases from the Earth's interior. Simple. है. So because initially in the molten state everything is mixed up. The solid, liquid, gases, everything was mixed up. That was in that volatile state. So as the temperature starts to decrease, the heavier element starts to sink down. Okay, मान लो ऐसे स्टोव में उबाल रहा था सांबर. So स्टोव बंद कर दिया. So heavier elements will sink down first. The lighter elements will come towards the surface. So gases which were dissolved in this, it will start to come out gradually. You know, that is what is degassing. Degassing happened during density separation only. Yes, yes, both are parallel process. Which one? Archean? No. Fossil fuels अलग है. Blue green algae is evolved. It evolved. So Archean is the time period during which the evolution of life happened. So first as non-photosynthetic microorganisms, which we are not sure how exactly it was. So but we knew for sure that before the evolution of blue-green algae, there was some form of life which was non-photosynthetic. And photosynthetic mein blue-green algae was the first one. The evolution happened in that period. Okay. Anything else? So let's proceed. So in the topic of interior of the earth, we studied about the sources through which we will understand about the earth's interior. So based on this information, we have analyzed the earth's interior and we have to come to conclusion, okay, so almost ऐसे होना चाहिए earth's interior. So that we can study under two headings. One is through chemical properties, which we called as the chemical divisions of earth's interior. So second one is physical divisions. So overall, I told you that there are different layers in the earth's interior, right? So these layers are divided either through their chemical properties or through the physical properties. Both are different. First, let's understand the chemical properties. So I told you that earth's interior is made up of all the different elements, and the heaviest elements are concentrated in the core. That is majorly made up of nickel and iron. Okay, they are dominated by nickel and iron. That part we call it as core. It is called as core. Now core has two parts. One is inner core. Another one is outer core. It is divided into two parts, but both are made up of heavier elements like nickel and iron. So that's why both are called as core only. So around that core, the rest of the other matter, which is the major layer of the earth's interior, which covers the earth by volume nearly 83%. That is our mantle. So mantle is made up of such kind of elements which are not too light, not too heavy. Core is very heavy like nickel and iron. The outermost layer is called as crust. It is majorly made up of silica, aluminium, magnesium, calcium, they form lighter compounds. Okay, they form lighter compounds. So they are all concentrated in the outer layer. That is what we call as the crust. In between, it is called as mantle. Where there is lesser silica content, there is higher magnesium and iron content, but not as high as the core, but it is in between. Okay? That is what is mantle. So overall we can identify three layers: crust, mantle and core. Crust is very lighter, silica, dominated by silica, aluminum and magnesium. So mantle is dominated by magnesium, calcium and iron. Core is dominated by nickel and iron. So mantle is again divided into two parts. One is upper mantle, another one is lower mantle. Okay? Mantle is divided into upper mantle and lower mantle. Core is divided into outer core and inner core. So these terms are specific, you have to use it as it is. You cannot say outer mantle, inner mantle. It is upper mantle and lower mantle. And you cannot say upper core, lower core. It is outer core, inner core. What about crust? Is it a single layer? The layer is single, but the material is different in different locations. In some places, the crust is slightly thicker. In other places, the crust is very thinner. This is what we call it as continental crust. This is called as oceanic crust. Okay, crust is a single layer only. But the single layer is made up of different material in different locations. In some other regions it is very thick, which we call it as a continental crust. In other regions it is very thin, which we call it as the oceanic crust. So this is inner core, outer core, mantle. Mantle is divided into upper and lower mantle. Crust is divided into continental crust and oceanic crust, like this. In some parts it is very thick, which we call it as the continental crust. In other parts it is thin, which is called as oceanic crust. उसके ऊपर पानी रहेगा, उसी को ही सी बोलते हैं या ओशन बोलते हैं. ठीक है? These are the chemical layers. Chemically we have divided like this. So it is majorly dominated by the divisions. The divisions are majorly dominated by the material. So let's talk about the crust first. Crust is the outermost layer, right? It is the outermost layer. made up of very light elements. It's the lightest of all the three. And the temperature is also coolest of all the three. As you go deeper, temperature increases. In terms of characteristics of crust, we can study it under two headings. One is continental crust, another one is oceanic crust. The fundamental difference between continental crust and oceanic crust is the material. In both the cases we have silica, which is common, that is why it is lighter. But in addition to silica, in case of continental crust, we will see the domination of aluminium. Here we will see the domination of magnesium. That is why the continental crust is called as Sial layer. The oceanic crust is called as सीमा लेयर. मैग्नीशियम Mg है, बट बोलने के लिए इजी रहेगा इसलिए हमने लिख दिया है. ठीक है, इट इज कॉल्ड एस सीमा लेयर, Cl layer and सीमा layer. Is that clear? In some of the sources, सीमा is being referred to as mantle, which is wrong. ठीक है, पहले थोड़ा सा क्लैरिटी नहीं था उसके बारे में, अभी तो क्लियर है. इट इज द ओशनिक क्रस्ट विच इज सीमा लेयर. ठीक है, सो राइट अबाउट दिस. यही लिखो, यही तो सेम ही है. The chemical divisions. First one, crust. First point, it is the uppermost layer of earth. It is the uppermost layer of earth. Next point, it is made up of lighter elements. Such as silica, aluminium, magnesium, calcium, etc. Next point, it is the lightest in terms of density. It is the lightest in terms of density. Next point, a crust is of two types. Continental crust and oceanic crust. Continental crust and oceanic crust. ठीक है, उसके नीचे दो कॉलम बना दो, वहीं पे लिख लेता है डिफरेंसेस. कॉन्टिनेंटल क्रस्ट एंड ओशनिक क्रस्ट. The first difference, it is called as Sial layer. Continental crust is called as Sial, Si plus Al, Sial layer. Oceanic crust is called as Sima layer, Si plus Ma. So other than this thickness, the thickness of continental crust varies between 35 to 45 kilometers on an average. The thickness varies between 35 to 45 kilometers. And if it is any mountainous area, it goes up to 80 to 90 kilometers. Okay, माउंटेन एरियाज में तो और ज़्यादा डीप रहता है, इसका डेप्थ भी थोड़ा सा डीप रहता है माउंटेनस एरियाज में. फाइन. द एवरेज थिकनेस ऑफ ओशनिक क्रस्ट इज 8 to 10 kilometers. It is very thin. So after 8 to 10 kilometers, you will start to see the mantle. Okay? So one is thick, another one is thin. However, in terms of density, it is lighter. In terms of density, it is lighter. In terms of density, it is heavier. Lighter in density, heavier in density. इसका मतलब क्या है? Thicker doesn't mean that it is heavier. If you see the density of the material, it is lighter. Okay, for example, thermocol ले लो, thick भी रहता है, ज़्यादा dense नहीं रहता है. This is thin, but heavier in density. For example, a sheet of iron, है ना, thin रहता है, heavier रहता है. So like that, it is thicker and lighter in density. That is thinner but heavier in density. The rocks which the continental crust is made up of, they are brighter in color. Brighter rocks. If you take these rocks, they appear brighter. The oceanic crust are made up of darker rocks. They are brighter, here darker. In terms of age, continental crust is older in age. Oceanic crust is younger in age. So ऐसा कैसे? So दोनों तो पहले ओरिजिनली आया था ना. So जब ओरिजिनली अर्थ फॉर्म हुआ था, so when the earth had evolved initially, both were there, continental crust and oceanic crust was there. Is that right? Yes, it was there. However, the original oceanic crust is no more. The oceanic crust continuously gets created and continuously gets destroyed. We'll understand in detail in plate tectonics. Okay, we'll understand in detail over there. Sea floor spreading, plate tectonics, वहाँ पर समझ आएगा. तो आप लोग पढ़ा होगा, ठीक है, बाद में बात करते हैं. Continental crust will never get created nor get destroyed. तो ओरिजिनली जो फॉर्म हुआ था वही है, वही रहेगा. It will not get destroyed. So that is why it is the oldest. In fact, on the continents we have collected the rocks which are as old as 4 billion years. उतना पुराना rocks भी मिल गया है. Not in the oceanic crust. Oceanic crust, the oldest rocks which we have collected is around 150 million years. Not older than that. We could not find. ठीक है. So other than silica and aluminium, the continental crust is also dominated by सोडियम एंड पोटेशियम. यहां पर थोड़ा सा इनका कॉन्सेंट्रेशन ज्यादा रहता है. हियर कैल्शियम and iron. In addition to magnesium, you will also find higher content of calcium and iron. So that is why The continental crust is lighter in density. Oceanic crust is heavier in density. So any doubts here regarding crust? Iron ore? Can you be louder? Not able to hear. अच्छा ये कैसे पता चला? ये using various different sources. We have earthquake waves. We know the behavior of earthquake waves. How much speed it will travel in. What is the direction? So based on the change in the speed, based on the change in the direction, we can analyze through which kind of mineral it is passing. And not only one source, we will compare with the other source. For example, meteorites. Meteorites का core के अंदर भी nickel and iron है. So using all these evidences over a long period of time, we have come to conclusion. That is what is density studies, seismic studies. Yes. नहीं वो क्रस्ट ही है. वो शुरू होगा सरफेस है. ओशनिक क्रस्ट जहां पर है वहां पर है डीपेस्ट पार्ट. एनीथिंग एल्स? ठीक है. So if you wanted to write this, the earlier one, you can write this. So recall, just be back. So that was about crust. So next one, mantle. So mantle is like intermediate zone, right? So even the material, the type of minerals which you find here, they are also like intermediate type. They are not too light, not too heavy. So we have lesser proportion of silica and lesser proportion of iron. But however, iron is more compared to the crust. So we have more proportion of iron, magnesium than compared to the crust. However, it is lesser compared to the core. So that intermediate zone is called as mantle. Mantle extends from the edge of the crust to up to the depth of, up to what depth? 2,888 kilometers. Okay, 2,888 kilometers, easy to remember. It is divided into the upper mantle and lower mantle. So the major difference is slightly density. Lower mantle is higher in density. Okay? And by volume, this is the largest. It covers 83% of Earth. It covers 83% of the Earth. मतलब major तो mantle ही है. Only at the center we have core, and the outermost layer is crust. Crust is very, very thin. Even at the deepest part, Even if you imagine 80 to 90 kilometers, it is very, very less compared to the entire radius of Earth. What is the radius of Earth? 6,300 kilometers. So उसके comparison में तो ये बहुत बहुत पतला है. So if you imagine, if you take an egg, okay, egg तो देखा होगा, egg का जो outermost shell है, crust is much thinner than that in proportion. Crust is much more thinner than that in proportion. ठीक है? So that is what is crust, and then the mantle. By mass, however, it covers only 68% of mass. The mantle covers only 68%. Rest of the mass, a huge quantity of mass is compressed in a very small volume at core. That is where the density is very high. Okay? So core is divided into outer core and inner core. So how have we divided it into outer core and inner core? Solid and liquid. Most of it is made up of iron and nickel only, majorly made up of iron and nickel only. The temperature is very high, density is very high, but however the outer core is liquid and the inner core is solid. So because of this domination of nickel and iron, it is called as knife layer, NIFE, knife layer बोलते हैं इसको. Now, so why the outer core is liquid? प्रेशर कम है तो मैंटल भी लिक्विड होना चाहिए, और कम है प्रेशर. टेम्परेचर कहाँ पर कम है? मैंटल. ठीक है, टेम्परेचर आउटर कोर में ज़्यादा है, सो बट इनर कोर में और ज़्यादा है. वहाँ पर क्यों मेल्ट नहीं होता है? Yes, it is the melting point. The difference is the melting point of rocks. So even though the temperature varies, temperature increases as we go towards the deeper depths. Temperature increases, right? The pressure will not increase at the same rate. वही same rate में increase नहीं होगा. As you come into the inner core, the pressure becomes too much. Okay, it's too heavy. Because at the inner core, you are taking the pressure of the entire earth. All the rock layers in the upper parts, they are exerting pressure. So inner core में तो बहुत ज़्यादा pressure रहता है. So because of very high pressure at the inner core, the melting point of the rock itself is very, very high. For example, so we have to see the prevailing temperature and the melting point. We will understand. What do you mean by prevailing temperature? The temperature which is present over there. So let's say the prevailing temperature in outer core is around 3000 degrees Celsius. The prevailing temperature in inner core is around 5000 degrees Celsius. Let's say 5000 5500 के बीच में रहता है. Okay, outer core is let's say 3000. Inner core is let's say 5000 degrees Celsius. In the outer core, the actual melting point is 2500 degrees Celsius. The melting point of rocks is 2500 degrees Celsius. I'm not saying it is, I'm just taking example. In the inner core, the melting point of rocks is 6000 degrees Celsius. Here the prevailing temperature is more than the melting point, the rocks melt. Here the prevailing temperature is less than the melting point, the rocks remain solid. Why the melting point has become this high? Because of high pressure. Simple, right? It is because of high pressure. The melting point of the rocks at the inner core is very, very high. It will keep it solid. However, in the outer core, the pressure is sufficient and sufficient to cause it to melt. Fine? That's outer core and inner core. Right about this. So next one, mantle. It is denser than crust and lighter than core. Denser than crust and lighter than core. Next point. It covers 83% of Earth's volume 83% of Earth's volume, and 68% of Earth's mass. (83% of Earth's volume and 68% of Earth's mass). Next point. It extends up to the depth of 2,888 kilometers. 2,888 kilometers. The mantle contains higher proportion of magnesium and lower proportion of silica and aluminium. Lower proportion of silica and aluminium. Next point, it is divided into upper and lower mantle. Upper and lower mantle. So next, core. It is the innermost and the densest layer. It is the innermost and the densest layer. Next point, it is rich in nickel and iron. It is rich in nickel and iron. Therefore, it is also called as knife layer, N-I-F-E, N and F capital. Also called as knife layer, N-I-F-E. It is divided into outer core and inner core. It is divided into outer core and inner core. Next point, the outer core is liquid and the inner core is solid. As the pressure at inner core is very high. As the pressure at inner core is very high. So that is chemical divisions. Any doubts here? Chemical divisions clear? रेडियस क्या है? मतलब you are talking about the depth of the mantle. रेडियस तो यहाँ पर देख रहे हो ना, इसका ओवरऑल साइज देखो, ओवरऑल एरिया कवर्ड इज मोर, राइट. इसका रेडियस तो इतना ही है, बट ओवरऑल एरिया कवर्ड इज ऑल्सो लेस. So for online students, I have a request. So please don't raise your queries in this response portal. So you have a separate portal for that, query portal, use that. So if you start asking questions here, I'll not be able to answer any of this. So I'll be totally neglecting this response portal. So it will be a loss. Okay, let's use this response portal for answering my questions. Okay, and simple things, yes sir, no sir, okay sir. Okay, so if you want me to repeat anything, you can simply ask over there. So, but otherwise queries, please use it. Use the query portal. Yes. Almost. It's the thickness of mantle is almost uniform, as we know. So major conclusion says so. So अंदर जाके ही पता चलेगा exactly कैसे. हाँ बात करेंगे, रुक जाओ. So that is chemical divisions. Let's talk about physical divisions. Yes. क्रस्ट से, क्रस्ट के बाद में. Physical divisions. Physical divisions refers to the divisions of Earth's interior based on the physical status, physical conditions. Okay, so immediately try to draw this figure. I will not be giving any extra time. So अभी तक तो ये पता हो जाना चाहिए था, जो भी मैं लिखूंगा इधर, so immediately draw करना है. इनर कोर लिख रहे हो, आउटर कोर, लोअर मेंटल, अपर मेंटल, continental crust, oceanic crust. So you don't have to make any color here, simple सा लिखो बस. This is crust, mantle and core based on the chemical divisions. Physical divisions of the Earth's interior involve again 4 layers. Chemically, crust is different from mantle. Crust is made up of silica, higher silica content, right? Mantle has lower silica content. The mantle is divided into upper mantle and lower mantle. upper mantle is divided into three parts. The upper part of upper mantle, the uppermost part of upper mantle, the middle part of upper mantle, the lower part of upper mantle. Okay? So upper mantle itself is divided into three parts: uppermost part of upper mantle, middle part of upper mantle, and the rest of upper mantle. Even though chemically they are different, physically the crust and the uppermost part of upper mantle is attached together as a single unit. So is that visible? Chalo. ठीक है? Even though chemically the uppermost part of upper mantle is different from the crust, but physically it is attached with the crust. So it is like our 100th Kaurava. You know, among the Kaurava brothers, one joined Pandavas. So before the beginning of Kurukshetra war itself, he announced that he will not be fighting along with Kauravas, and he joined Pandava camp. Okay, by blood तो अलग है, साथ तो इनका दे दिया, ऐसा ही. The uppermost part of the mantle is attached with the crust and forms one single unit. It forms one separate single unit. It exists as this single unit. That is what we call it as lithosphere. So what is lithosphere? Lithosphere is crust plus upper part of upper mantle. Crust plus upper part of upper mantle is what we call it as lithosphere. It extends up to the depth of 100 kilometers from the surface. The entire thickness of lithosphere extends up to the depth of 100 kilometers from the surface. That is what is lithosphere. So how do we identify this? This is different from the other parts of the mantle. Kaise? This is totally solid. This is totally hard and rigid. It is hard and rigid layer. पूरा के पूरा hard है, cold भी है, rigid भी है. Fine. And below that there is another separate layer. Which is separate from the lithosphere, which is called as asthenosphere. Below the lithosphere, up to the depth of 400 kilometers from lithosphere. From lithosphere up to the depth of 400 kilometers, there is a separate layer which is physically different. Even though chemically same ही है, physically इसका characteristic अलग ही है. So what kind of physical characteristic it is? It is not completely solid, not completely liquid. It is semi-solid, semi-liquid in nature. Like plastic, it undergoes deformation under pressure. थोड़ा सा pressure दे दो, दबा दो, थोड़ा सा deform होगा. It is not completely in a solid state, but not completely in the liquid state. It is in between. So that layer is called as asthenosphere. And above the asthenosphere, it is totally rigid layer. Totally hard and rigid layer. That outer layer is called as lithosphere. So how exactly lithosphere is there? Like this. It covers the entire earth like a solid shell. It covers the entire earth like a solid shell. That outer rigid shell is what we call it as lithosphere. Up to what depth? Up to the depth of 100 kilometers. But it is not one single shell. ऐसा नहीं कि पूरा के पूरा एक ही single shell है. It is broken into different parts. It is broken into multiple different parts. All of them are merged together, but you can clearly identify the boundaries between them. It is like totally cracked. That each of this part is called as plate. So plate is basically each individual part of lithosphere. The entire outer shell is lithosphere, and each individual part of this lithosphere is what we call it as plate. Okay, we'll come back to this again in plate tectonics. Fine. So this outermost layer, which is physically single unit, is what we call it as lithosphere. It is made up of crust and upper part of upper mantle. It is totally solid and rigid and hard shell. Covers the entire earth like a outer shell. Below that there is asthenosphere, which is semi-solid, semi-liquid state, extends up to the depth of 400 kilometers. So it undergoes deformation under pressure. So that's why even if there is a small change in the temperature or pressure condition, it undergoes melting and cause the generation of magma. Magma comes out very easily. Most of the volcanoes which are there on the surface of earth derive their magma from this layer. So it is like ready to undergo melting. थोड़ा सा pressure दे दो, so melt हो जाएगा. The rest of the mantle is what we call it as mesosphere. Rest of mantle is called as mesosphere. The rest of core is called as barysphere. So characteristics are almost same. Since we identify a separate unit other than asthenosphere, rest of mantle together is called as mesosphere. And the core is also identified as a separate unit. That's why it is called as barysphere. Characteristics सारा same ही है जो earlier discuss किया था. ठीक है? So here we need the upper two layers, which is very important. That is, one is lithosphere, another one is asthenosphere. Rest entire core is called as mesosphere. The rest entire mantle is called as lithosphere, and the core is called as barysphere. ठीक है, अभी बताइए. So barysphere is made up of outer liquid layer and inner solid layer. ठीक है, limited information है. Okay, the overall information is limited. जितना पता है उसके हिसाब से किया. मेसोस्फीयर से भी आएगा, एस्थेनोस्फीयर से भी आएगा. सबसे ज्यादा तो एस्थेनोस्फीयर से आता है. Because it is in a state which is ready to undergo melting. That is what is called as plastic in nature. ठीक है? Any other doubts? Which one? So almost same ही है, just the solid form and liquid form. Barysphere, outer barysphere, inner barysphere. So overall information is limited. That's why we have kept it as a single layer. सब lithosphere में है. So this is how the lithosphere. You can see the uppermost layer. This is what is we call it as the crust. It is very thin. In case of oceanic crust, it is thick in the case of continental crust. Below the crust, we have the upper part of upper mantle. Together, it is called as lithosphere. Below the lithosphere, we have asthenosphere, which is semi-solid, semi-liquid in state. It is like a sponge on which the harder lithosphere sits. Okay, it is like a sponge on which the harder lithosphere sits, and that is what it helps in moving. The individual units of lithosphere, which we call it as the plates, they are not completely static. They are not completely static. They change their position. They are in constant motion. Plate movement. We call it as plate movement. ठीक है? So detail में बात करेंगे. Why they are moving? Because lower layer is in semi-solid and semi-liquid state. Below that there is mesosphere, and below that there is barysphere. ठीक है? So write about this. Crust is part of lithosphere, of course. Lithosphere is made up of both crust as well as upper part of upper mantle. Together it is called as lithosphere. नहीं यहाँ तक है इसका एरो, यहाँ पर दिख नहीं रहे, यहाँ तक है. ठीक है, देखो यहाँ पर देखो, यहाँ तक है. First one, lithosphere. First point, it is a solid layer. It is a solid layer made up of crust and upper part of upper mantle. Solid layer made up of crust and upper part of upper mantle. Next point, it is a hard and rigid outer layer. It is a hard and rigid outer layer which is divided into different plates. This is divided into different plates. Next point, the thickness of lithosphere is nearly 100 kilometers. Thickness of lithosphere is nearly 100 kilometers. Second, asthenosphere. Asthenosphere. It extends between 100 to 400 kilometers. 100 to 400 kilometers. Next point, it is in semi-solid, semi-liquid state. Semi-solid, semi-liquid state which undergoes deformation under pressure. Next point, it is the source of magma. It is the source of magma to the surface. Next point, it is also called as low velocity zone. It is also called as low velocity zone. Why? The earthquake waves while passing through this layer slows down a bit. Earthquake waves while passing through this layer slows down a bit because it is not completely solid and not completely liquid, right? So जिसके वजह से थोड़ा सा स्लो डाउन होता है, इसलिए लो वेलोसिटी जोन बोलते हैं. So third one, mesosphere. It includes the rest of mantle, it includes the rest of mantle. Fourth, barysphere. Barysphere, it includes both outer and inner core. Both outer and inner core. Next, composition. That is what exactly the earth is made up of. Overall earth, the highest element, highest in terms of proportion, is iron. If you take the entire earth, 35% of the earth is made up of iron only. 35% of the earth is totally made up of iron only. It's like an iron ball floating in the space. That is why earth is the densest planet. Okay, that is why earth is the densest planet. So highest proportion is iron. If you take all the layers together. The second, oxygen, which accounts for nearly 30%. Okay, so these two you have to remember the proportion. Rest you have to remember the order. First 5 याद रखो काफी है. So number 1 iron, number 2 oxygen, number 3 silicon, number 4 magnesium, number 5 nickel. So this is earth as a whole. लिखते जाओ. वो तो atmosphere का है. This is surface and below. So if we talk about the crust alone, the outermost layer, oxygen has the highest proportion, number 1, which is 46%. The outer crust is majorly made up of oxygen. 46% is oxygen. Why? Because various different minerals, various different elements form oxides very easily. Silicon oxide, aluminum oxide, iron oxide, and oxygen is very easily available from the atmosphere. So वहाँ से mix up हो जाता है. So that is why oxygen has the highest proportion. Second one is silicon. Third, aluminium. Fourth, iron. Fifth, calcium. यहाँ पर भी 1 to 5 order याद रखना. So just remember oxygen proportion and चाहिए तो silicon भी याद रखो काफी है. यहाँ पर दो, बाकी सारा order याद रखना. No need to remember the proportion. हो गया? हाँ वही है. और कौन सा है? कोई भी मिट्टी से नहीं होता है, सैंड से होता है. सो निकल और कोई भी लेयर में ज्यादा नहीं है जितना कोर में है. सो इसीलिए this is overall earth, right? So nickel का proportion is very high in core. The last part, discontinuities. Discontinuity. So what is a discontinuity? So discontinuity is any transition zone between two different layers. It is a transition zone between two different layers of differing characteristics. So we have all the different layers in the Earth's interior. The characteristics of crust and mantle is different, mantle and core is different. So if you are traveling from crust to mantle, we will see sudden difference in the properties once we enter the mantle. From mantle to core, again there is sudden difference. So that transition zone where we can identify different characteristics है ना, suddenly change हो जाते हैं, density change हो जाएगा, the chemical composition change हो जाएगा. So that zone where this is suddenly experienced, that is what we call it as discontinuities. So discontinuities कैसे पता चला? While studying the earthquake waves. When the earthquake waves are passing from one layer to another, they change their direction suddenly. They change their speed suddenly. So that is one discontinuity zone. Okay? Basically that transition zone between the different layers where the characteristic suddenly changes. Okay, write the definition. It is a transition zone between different layers of Earth's interior. Between different layers of Earth's interior with differing physical and chemical characteristics. Differing physical and chemical characteristics. रुक जाए डाउट के लिए टाइम आएगा तब पूछना. So what are the different discontinuities which we can identify? There are 5 major discontinuities. You have to remember which one comes where. The first layer of discontinuity in fact exists within the continental crust itself. While moving inside the continental crust, we experience sharp different characteristics between the upper continental crust and lower continental crust. Within the continental crust, we experience a sharp difference at one depth. That is our first discontinuity, which is called as cone rod discontinuity. Okay, लिखते जाओ. The first one is cone rod discontinuity, which is there between upper continental crust and lower continental crust. That's because continental crust is very thick. है ना? So while passing through the continental crust, we experience that sudden difference. We don't find this discontinuity in the oceanic crust. Oceanic crust is very thin as such. Okay, overall thickness is very thin, so we won't experience much of discontinuity within the oceanic crust. So within the continental crust being thick in nature, we experience sudden difference in characteristic. So as we move from crust to mantle, of course there is a clear distinction. We experience the second discontinuity, which is called as moho. Moho, which is short form for Mohorovicic. The second one is called as Mohorovicic discontinuity. So Mohorovicic is between crust and mantle. It is between crust and mantle. The third discontinuity is between upper mantle and lower mantle, which is called as Ripeti. The third discontinuity is between upper mantle and lower mantle, which is called as Ripeti. REPETTI. You don't have to elaborate here. एक सिंपल सा फिगर लिखो, वहां पर मार्क करते जाओ, ऊपर से नीचे पता होना चाहिए. ठीक है, जस्ट ड्रॉ द फिगर, दैट वुड बी सफिशिएंट. The fourth discontinuity is experienced between the lower mantle and outer core, which is called as, सुना है कोई? Yes, Gutenberg. It's called as Gutenberg. It is between lower mantle and outer core. Overall, we can say between mantle and core, right? The fifth and the last important one is between outer core and inner core, which is called as Lehman. Lehman discontinuity. Conrad, Moho, Ripeti, Gutenberg, and finally Lehman. Conrad discontinuity is a difference, sudden difference which we experience within the continental crust. So even though there is overall uniformity, so I have told you it is majorly made up of silica and aluminium, so it is lighter in density. But within that there would be some difference as we go into the deeper levels. The density increases, of course, right? So we experience at one layer there is a sharp difference. Such kind of discontinuities are there in many different parts of the earth. ये जो 5 यहाँ पर लिखा है ये मेजर है, माइनर तो बहुत मिल जाएगा, मैंटल के अंदर, कोर के अंदर मिल जाएगा. ठीक है, मेजरली यू वांट टू आइडेंटिफाई. फर्स्ट वन इज Conrad, which is there between the upper part of the continental crust and lower part of the continental crust. Upper continental crust and lower continental crust, we experience sudden change in the characteristics in terms of density, of course, majorly. Okay, composition तो same ही रहेगा. So density. So that is what we call it as Conrad discontinuity. Between crust and mantle, of course, there is a huge difference. So there we have Moho. Upper mantle, lower mantle, Ripeti. Lower mantle, outer core, Gutenberg. Outer core, inner core, Lehman. Okay, just a small prelims topic. So you just have to know the order. So ऊपर से नीचे या नीचे से ऊपर. ठीक है? So this completes our topic of interior of earth. So अभी बताइए if you have any doubts. नहीं नहीं नहीं, उसके लिए रुक जाए, अर्थक्वेक का टॉपिक है, पूरा बता देंगे। ठीक है, तो बात करेंगे। यस, इट कैन बी बोथ, चेंज इन डेंसिटी, चेंज इन कॉम्पोजिशन, चेंज इन द केमिकल प्रॉपर्टीज, फिजिकल प्रॉपर्टीज, दोनों हो सकता है। एनीथिंग एल्स? ठीक है, द नेक्स्ट टॉपिक, टाइप्स ऑफ रॉक्स। Types of rocks. First, what are rocks? Can somebody define rocks? Composition of different minerals in solid form. So what are minerals? Minerals are aggregate of elements. Elements are the purest form of matter, right? Elements are the purest form. सबसे लोअर मोस्ट लेवल में होते हैं, उसको भी डिवाइड करके सब एटॉमिक पार्टिकल्स बनाते हैं, वो अलग बात है। एलिमेंट्स आर द लोएस्ट लेवल। वी हैव वेरियस डिफरेंट एलिमेंट्स, ठीक है। सो पीरियोडिक टेबल तो देखा होगा, ठीक है। सो ऑल दीज एलिमेंट्स विल नॉट अकर in its purest form in the nature. Okay, very rarely we find them in its purest form. On the surface of earth, they occur as compounds. Elements, for example, aluminium, iron, oxygen, carbon, silicon. These are elements. They don't exist in its purest form. They are not very stable in its purest form. They form compounds. The stable compounds, for example, Al2O3, aluminium oxide. CO2, Fe2O3, ferrous oxide. So like this, they exist in compounds. So in this, carbon compounds are organic compounds, you call it as organic. So non-carbon, they are called as inorganic. Inorganic. So it is usually the inorganic compounds which we call it as the minerals. जो mineral हम बोलते हैं usually, but in some of the cases we also take carbon into the mineral compounds. Coal is also considered as mineral in some of the cases. Okay? So overall, in general, it is the inorganic compounds which are called as minerals. This is aluminium group, aluminium mineral. This is iron mineral. Okay? So, but even these minerals don't exist in a complete purest form. You go to iron mine, take a rock. You cannot say this is completely Fe2O3, 100% Fe2O3 तो नहीं होता है इसमें. उसके साथ में बहुत सारा दूसरी मिनरल्स मिक्सअप हो जाता है. Okay, in physical form on the surface of earth, they exist as aggregate of minerals. Multiple different minerals will mix together to form rock. So what is a rock? Rock is solid aggregate of minerals which are usually inorganic. Inorganic minerals is what we usually call it as solid. But in some cases we also include organic. The solid aggregate of minerals are called as rocks. Rocks are everywhere. The entire earth is totally made up of different types of rocks. Even though we call it as the crust, mantle, core, everything is rock only. All these mineral groups, they have formed different types of rocks. Right? Not only earth, all the inner planets, Venus, Mercury, Mars, and even the asteroids, All of these are rocky in nature. The actual material form in which these minerals exist in nature, that is what is rocks. Okay? So what are the differences between rocks and minerals then? Rocks are basically aggregate of minerals. Okay, just now I told you rocks are basically aggregate of minerals. Minerals are solid inorganic substances. For example, Fe2O3, Al2O3, Fe3O4. Okay, so these are what we call it as the minerals. But they don't occur as it is in its purest form, they mix together to form a rock. A rock has no definite chemical composition, whereas a mineral has a definite chemical composition. So we don't put any particular rock in terms of chemical composition. We don't say granite has this much of chemical composition. We'll say mineral group has a chemical composition. Okay, so we'll say Fe2O3, Fe3O4, that is mineral. But if you take the rock of iron, it will not have a definite chemical composition. Why? The way minerals get mixed together, it all depends upon the local condition. The local conditions in which they are existing, the local conditions in which these rocks are formed, that will decide the overall composition. No two rocks in the world will be of same composition. 100% तो same होता ही नहीं है. They're all different. 90% similar हो सकते हैं, 95% हो सकता है, 100% तो बिल्कुल नहीं हो सकता है. Even if you take the same rocks from two different regions, they are different. Okay, you take a same rock, granite from one region, granite from another region, they are of different composition. Exact chemical composition तो हम define नहीं करते. We will say these are the major mineral groups which are present in this. Majority groups are these. That is how we define it. Okay? So we don't define the rocks by chemical composition because every rock on the surface of earth is different. Just some major commonalities would be there. That is why no rock has a common chemical composition. There is no chemical composition as such. Minerals are organized to form rocks. Elements are organized to form minerals. The grouping of different minerals is what is rock. Grouping of different elements is mineral. There are three types of rocks: igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. All the rocks can be clubbed together into three groups. Major groups तो तीन ही है. The rest everything is subcategory of these. There are three types of rocks: igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphics. There are four major mineral groups. I'm talking about the groups: silicate groups, carbonate groups, sulfide group, and metallic groups. Okay? The minerals are grouped in this manner. Examples of specific rocks: granite is a specific rock, basalt is a rock, sandstone. Example of specific mineral: iron mineral, for example Fe2O3 बताया था, or silicon mineral, magnesium mineral, nickel mineral, the overall mineral compounds. So these are the differences between rocks and minerals. So basically rock is any naturally occurring aggregate of minerals. Okay, write the definition. Any naturally occurring aggregate of minerals, naturally occurring aggregate of minerals is called as a rock. It's called as a rock. The difference between rocks and minerals. So ये table लिख लेना and take a break. We'll continue after the break. The topic is types of rocks. So we discussed what are rocks. So I told you that there are three major categories of rocks. First one, igneous rocks. Second, sedimentary rocks. Third, metamorphic rocks. So what is the basic difference between these three types of rocks? The igneous rocks are formed directly from magma. What is magma? So what is magma? Magma is molten rock material. It is क्या हुआ? Magma eruption हुआ है. So magma is molten rock material. The rock material from which rocks can be formed. That molten rock material is called as magma. When magma cools down, it solidifies and it becomes rocks. So those rocks which are directly formed from magma, it is called as igneous rocks. So once an igneous rock is formed, it becomes solid, hard, and if it is there on the surface of earth, various different forces act on these rocks. What are the forces? Wind, sunlight, rainfall, river water, or glaciers, or the coastal waves. So all these impact the rocks and it will break down the rocks continuously into small sediments. The small pieces of rocks, they are called as sediments. Sometimes these sediments will accumulate together in specific conditions and they forms another type of rock which we call as sedimentary rocks. So what are sedimentary rocks? The rocks which are formed from the sediments derived from other rocks. So what is metamorphic rock? A rock which has changed its nature. Originally और कौन सा था? दूसरा था. So फिर बदल गया, change हो गया. Either its chemical property is changed or its physical property is changed. That changed rocks we call it as metamorphic rocks. ठीक है? So three basic difference. So let's talk about the first one, igneous rocks. So what do you mean by igneous rocks? What is the meaning of igneous? Word igneous means fire. Fire हूं मैं. Flower समझा गया. That is what is igneous rocks. The meaning of the word igneous means made from fire. Okay, made from fire. So fire here refers to the magma. The magma being very hot material, that is why it is being referred to as fire here. Once the magma cools down, how it cools down? When it comes onto the surface. When it comes onto the surface, it cools down, it solidifies and becomes a rock. That is what we call as igneous rocks. Since it is formed directly from the magma, they are also called as primary rocks. All the igneous rocks are called as primary rocks because secondary rocks are sedimentary rocks or metamorphic rocks, which are derived from the primary rocks, majorly. So igneous rocks are basically formed directly from the magma. Magma comes from deep in the earth's interior, either from asthenosphere or from the rest of mantle, the lower mantle. In both the cases, it is possible. The magma continuously comes from earth's interior. Why it comes from earth's interior? Because the temperature is very high over there. In some places, the temperature suddenly increases and causes melting of these rocks over there. वहाँ पर जो rocks है उसको melt करता है. Once it gets melted, it becomes a very volatile. Okay, high temperature, high pressure, volatile status में आ जाते हैं. It will start to flow. It will start to flow in which direction? It will start to flow towards upper layers. Because it is in the upper layers, the temperature is low, pressure is low. It will move towards those regions. It will start to move towards the upper layers. So if this is the Earth's interior, so let's say this is core, and let's say this is lithosphere, the crust. Lithosphere मान लो, hard rigid layer. Whatever the magma which is generated either from here or from here, it moves in this direction. It enters lithosphere first. Okay, from the asthenosphere or mantle, it will come into the lithosphere. Lithosphere is solid layer, rigid layer, and it is also slightly cooler compared to the asthenosphere and mantle. It is made up of multiple different layers of rocks, and sometimes there are many gaps in between them. So that's why the magma usually accumulates in these gaps first. First it will accumulate in this gap. नीचे से ऊपर आया थोड़ा बहुत रेस्ट लेना है, ठीक है. So it will cool down a little bit. If at all pressure increases beyond that, if there is a magma supply is continuously coming from the interior, अंदर से तो continuously आ रहा है, यहाँ पर pressure build up होते जाएगा, then finally it erupts out through a volcano and few other sources. It will come out. So first the magma accumulates in the Earth's lithosphere, it cools down a bit, and if at all the pressure builds up, then only it erupts out. What if it is cooling down within the lithospheric rock layers only? It forms another type of rocks over there. वहाँ पर भी rock बन सकता है. Wherever it is cooling down, if magma cools down, it results in the formation of rocks. They are all igneous rocks. If the magma is cooling within the lithosphere, within the rock layers, it results in the formation of intrusive igneous rocks. We call it as intrusive. Intrusive means inside. अंदर से ही बन गया. It is formed within the rock layers itself. Such kind of igneous rocks which are formed within the lithosphere, they are called as intrusive igneous rocks. They are also called as plutonic rocks. Just another name. Intrusive igneous rocks are also called as plutonic rocks. So when the pressure builds up, the magma may not completely cool down, it erupts out on the surface. And it flows on the surface. As it flows on the surface, it cools down. So these rocks which are formed after the magma erupts out and cools down on the surface is called as extrusive igneous rocks. It is called as extrusive igneous rocks. They are also called as volcanic rocks. So igneous rocks are of two types. Intrusive igneous rocks, extrusive igneous rocks. Both are formed from the cooling of magma. Now depending upon the location where exactly it is cooling, we have two types. One is intrusive igneous rocks, another one is extrusive igneous rocks. So cooling down on the surface doesn't mean that it has to cool down only on the continents. It can also cool down below the oceans. But on the oceanic floor. Oceanic crust के बाहर आना चाहिए. It should come out of the oceanic crust and it should cool down below the water itself. Which one cools faster? One which cools down within the water, because the water is too cold. Okay? Now, so we have two types of igneous rocks. One is intrusive, another one is extrusive. So what is the difference between intrusive and extrusive? एक तो place of cooling है, ये तो clear ही पता है. So other than that, depending upon how exactly it is cooling, the nature of the rocks would change. The structure, the composition of rocks would change. Okay, for example, let's take a same magma. In one part, if it is cooling below the surface within the lithosphere, forming intrusive igneous rocks. In another part, it is just erupting out and cooling above the surface, forming extrusive igneous rocks. Even though the rock material is same, they would be of different nature. Why? The first difference, it is due to the difference in the rate of cooling. the rate at which the temperature decreases. Within the rock layers, there is already some amount of heat is there. The temperature is not as low as the surface, because of which it will not let this magma to cool down at a faster rate. It will cool down very slowly. When magma cools down very slowly, it results in crystalline texture. Crystalline texture. You might have seen granite. Granite तो देखा होगा, है ना? Granite is used for floors के लिए use करते हैं, flooring के लिए, right? It is one of the very strong rocks, and we can clearly identify crystals in the granite. Can you see? This is what is granite. यहाँ पर जो है, यहाँ पर black color crystals दिख रहे हैं. Such kind of crystalline texture is found only in those rocks which cools down within the lithosphere. Lithosphere के अंदर cool down होना चाहिए. That is possible only through slow cooling. If it cools down very fast, if it cools down rapidly, it results in glassy texture. पूरा shining रहता है, glassy रहता है. That is due to fast cooling. You won't identify crystalline texture. So like this is what we call it as basalt. Okay, you can't identify crystals separately here. It is rapidly cooling, it is faster. So the first difference is rate of cooling. Inside the earth, inside the lithosphere, when it cools slower. Above the surface, it cools faster. So when it cools slower, it results in crystalline texture. It cools faster, it results in glassy texture. The third difference, when it cools below the surface, it results in a strong material, strong rocks. The strength of these rocks are very high. बहुत high strength रहता है. One which cools down above the surface, they are not very strong. We don't use basalt for flooring. We use granite क्योंकि cracks नहीं होना चाहिए. It should be there for long duration of time. ठीक है? That is why we use granite. Right? It is one of the very strong rocks, and they are formed at very deeper levels. ठीक है? जैसे हमारा यूपीएससी प्रिपरेशन है, स्लो एंड स्टडी विंस द रेस. सो बेसमेंट स्ट्रांग होना चाहिए, है ना? जो फंडामेंटल कॉन्सेप्ट्स है उसमें क्लैरिटी होना चाहिए. देन ओनली यू कैन राइट बेटर आंसर्स. क्योंकि बेसमेंट स्ट्रांग नहीं है ना? जल्दी जल्दी पढ़ लिया, सो जो भी है चलो जल्दी जल्दी पढ़ो, फिर एग्जाम में जाके पता चलेगा. सो मेक योर सेल्फ एन इंट्रूसिव इग्नियस रॉक, है ना? स्ट्रेंथ होना चाहिए प्रिपरेशन में. सो बाहर से देखने के लिए शाइनी हो सकता है, बट अंदर स्ट्रेंथ नहीं है तो कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ेगा, मतलब कोई फायदा नहीं होगा. ठीक है? सो स्ट्रेंथ तब आएगा, सो वापस जाके अच्छे से रिवाइज करेंगे. ठीक है? सो दैट्स वाई द रॉक्स विच आर फॉर्म्ड अबव द सरफेस, इवन दो दे आर वेरी ग्लास, शाइनी है, सो देखने के लिए बहुत अच्छा दिखता है, कोई स्ट्रेंथ नहीं रहता इसमें. Okay, they are not much strong. There is not much of strength in that because they have cooled faster and they break faster. So we also use them in construction. We'll break it into small rocks. We'll mix it with cement. Okay, concrete बनाने में use करते हैं. ठीक है? So that is what is extrusive igneous rocks. Intrusive igneous rocks, extrusive igneous rocks. So the difference is in terms of rate of cooling, the texture, and the strength. The texture is crystalline texture. Crystals clearly दिखता है. Can you see crystals here, over there? That is what is crystalline texture. So in case of extrusive igneous rocks, you don't find crystalline structure. They are very fine, very smooth, and glassy. So another major difference, in fact, is the difference in the magma material itself. So just for example, I told you same magma cools down below surface, above surface. ऐसे कभी भी नहीं होता है. So there is a difference in the type of magma itself. ठीक है? Some of the magma is not very hot. Its temperature is slightly lower. It will not completely erupt out. It cools down below the surface. A magma which is too hot and too mobile, it definitely erupts out. The magma from which basaltic rocks are originated is different. The magma from which granite is originated is different. Okay, there is a difference in magma itself. Detail में बात करेंगे volcanism में. So, so the composition itself is different basically. The intrusive and extrusive rocks, they are different in composition itself. Usually it is observed that the intrusive rocks are richer in silica content. Usually it is more than 66% of silica. Silica content is higher in intrusive igneous rocks. The extrusive igneous rocks have silica content less than 52%. Silica content is lower. Silica कम है तो मैग्नीशियम ज़्यादा होगा, आयरन ज़्यादा होगा. That results in the formation of oceanic crust. Silica is higher, aluminum is higher. It results in the formation of continental crust. So that is why oceanic crust and continental crust, by formation itself, it is different. The magma is also different. The types of rocks are also different. So I told you continental crust are brighter in color. Most of them are intrusive igneous rocks. They are brighter in color like granite. Extrusive igneous rocks, they are darker in color like basalt. That is what is oceanic crust majorly. So those rocks which are higher in silica content, they are also called as acidic rocks or silicic rocks, referring to higher silica content. Those which are lesser in silica content, they are called as basic rocks or mafic rocks. They are also called as mafic rocks. Okay, this is how we classify these primary rocks. The primary rocks are basically the igneous rocks. They are classified into intrusive and extrusive based on the depth at which they are cooling. And based on the overall silica content, they are classified into acidic rocks and basic rocks. If it is in between 52 and 66%, it is called as intermediate rocks. Intermediate hai. The examples of igneous rocks, most commonly known example is granite. Granite is a igneous rocks which is formed at very deeper depths. बहुत नीचे form होता है. In the deeper layers of lithosphere, it is not easily accessible. So then how it becomes accessible? Once it is formed over a long period of time, it gets uplifted. There are various forces in the Earth's interior which will push these rock layers upwards. In some places it pushes it upwards, in other places it causes it to move downwards. Subsidence भी होता है, upliftment भी होता है. Okay, so there are different types of movements in the Earth's interior. We'll talk about that in the next topic. So because of the upliftment, these rocks which are formed at the lower depths will get uplifted and comes near to the surface. That is when we will be able to extract it. Okay? So example of intrusive igneous rock, one is granite, second one is gabbro. Okay, they are also formed at very deeper depths. Example of extrusive igneous rock, one is basalt, most commonly which is found on the oceanic floor. The magma which erupts on the oceanic floor forms basaltic rocks. There is also another extrusive igneous rock. Okay, try to remember this name. Andesite. Andesite is extrusive igneous rock. So which is formed, which is usually erupted on the continents. कभी कभी erupt होता है. So जिसके बारे में बात करते हैं बाद में. Okay, try to remember this name. It is important. Andesite rocks. So चार नाम काफी है. So examples के लिए granite, gabbro, andesite and basalt. So in terms of acidic rock example granite, basic rock example basalt. ठीक है? This is about igneous rocks. Any doubts about igneous rocks? They are not rocks. Diamond is a carbon. ठीक है? Dark. Basaltic rocks. Okay, write about this. Igneous rocks. First point. They are formed due to cooling solidification and crystallization. Cooling, solidification and crystallization of molten material from Earth's interior. From Earth's interior. We'll stop. They are also called as primary rocks. Next point. They are of two types. Intrusive and extrusive. Next subheading, intrusive igneous rocks. First point, they are formed from cooling of magma. From cooling of magma within the lithospheric layers. Within the lithospheric layers of Earth's interior. Next point, the slow cooling of magma results in crystalline texture. With higher strength. Next point, they are also called as plutonic rocks. They are also called as plutonic rocks. Example, granite, gabbro. Second, extrusive igneous rocks. First point, they are formed from cooling of magma above the Earth's surface. Next point, faster cooling results in glassy texture but with lower strength. Next point, they are also called as volcanic rocks. Example, basalt, comma andesite, andesite. Next paragraph. The igneous rocks are also classified into first one, acidic or silicic, with silica proportion of more than 66%. Silica proportion more than 66%. Second, basic or mafic, MAFIC. Basic or mafic, MAFIC, with silica content less than 52%. So example for acidic, granite. Example for basic, basalt. Okay, that is about igneous rocks. These are also the types of rocks. So types of igneous rocks. Majorly. So you know, this year 2022 mains there was a question directly on this. Explain the characteristics of primary rocks and its types. Simple था, यही था. Explain the characteristics of primary rocks and its types. जो अभी डिस्कस किया है यही लिखना है. 10 मार्क का क्वेश्चन था, डायरेक्ट आंसर. ऐसे वाला बहुत रेयरली मिलता है डायरेक्टली. सो तब तो पूरा छक्का मारना है. ठीक है, एज इट इज लिख दिया तो पूरा मिल जाएगा आपको. 6 to 7 मार्क्स मिल जाएगा. जो मैंने लिखवाया उसको एज इट इज लिख दिया तो. यस, felsic is silicic only. They are also called as felsic. Second one is sedimentary rocks. So whatever the rocks which are found on the surface. So if the rocks are below the surface, they are not much exposed. They don't get broken down very easily. जो surface के below रहता है, not much of the nature's forces will be able to reach it there. It will take a long period of time before they get exposed. Let's say there is a exposed part of it, थोड़ा सा ridge type of structure. What is a ridge? Elevated part is what we call as ridge, which is also called as outcrop. इसको outcrop भी बोलते हैं. So it is made up of different layers of rocks. The nature's forces continuously impacts this part. It is more exposed. इसका surface area जो open है वो ज़्यादा है. During the hot summers it gets heated up. During the night time cold conditions it cools down. It gets heated up, expands, cools down, contracts, expand, contracts. Over a period of time it becomes weakened. It forms cracks and breaks down. At the same time there are precipitation. The rainfall continuously impacts. There are winds. Winds are also one of the strong forces. So all these forces continuously tend to break down these exposed rocks. Over a long period of time, it gets broken down into smaller sediments. ऐसे एक ही बार में नहीं होगा. Bigger it forms, it broken down rocks. Gradually these rocks will become much smaller. Gradually it becomes finer sediments. These broken fragments of original rocks is what we call it as sediments. And the process is degradation of rocks, which majorly involves weathering. Okay, so weathering is breaking down. The rocks are broken down into sediments. It involves weathering as well as erosion. Erosion is something, the breakdown which happens with the movement. Well, like the running water is breaking down, that is what is erosion. River erosion bolte hain. Through the process of weathering and erosion, the rocks break down into finer sediments. So once they become finer sediments, they are light and easier to move. They get carried by the different agents like air or water or even glaciers. While moving, they carry these broken sediments. When they carry these broken sediments, if at all, in between we find, let's say, a basin kind of structure, a shallow basin. When these sediments are being carried, they get deposited in these basins. It will accumulate in these basins. From this direction, there are some sediments. From other direction, there are some more sediments. Some from this direction, this direction. Sari directions में continuously sediments accumulate होगा. All the different types of sediments will accumulate here. It forms multiple layers of sediments. Over a long period of time, it gets buried. What do you mean by buried? Getting filled. And it get compressed to the lower layers of surface. Surface से और नीचे आ जाएगा because of continuous deposition of the sediments from all the different directions. In these lower layers, at high temperature and high pressure conditions, surface से तो temperature ज़्यादा है, pressure भी ज़्यादा है, it gets hardened up and it forms rocks. Such kind of rocks are called as sedimentary rocks. The rocks which are formed from the sediments, the stages are important. The first one is degradation. Second one is transportation. Degradation involves both weathering and erosion. Number one, degradation. Number two, these broken sediments are transported. Number three, deposition. Number four, lithification. What is lithification? The process of formation of rock is called as lithification. So till here it was just the broken sediments which is just got deposited. It is just sediments. Over a long period of time it gets converted into rock. That is what is lithification. The process of formation of rock is lithification. And it involves various different processes inside. For example, compaction is part of lithification. Compaction is getting compressed. Dabana. All the different layers will fall on each other and compresses the lower ones. The pressure increases and it gets compacted. During that process, all the volatile material gets ejected out. The water comes out, it gets evaporated. All these such kind of material which are not very strong, they get removed. Only the hard materials will be left. But still it would contain some of the pore spaces, the gaps, air gaps in between. So gradually when a finer sediments falls on this, it will sink into this pore spaces. It will get cemented with finer material like silt or clay or mud. That is what we call it as cementation. When all such pore spaces are filled out, it gets hardened over a period of long time and becomes a rock, which we call it as sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock is basically a rock formed from the sediments derived from the other rocks. Who are these other rocks? It can be a igneous rock, or it can be a metamorphic rock. Even that undergoes breakdown, or it can be another sedimentary rock itself. The original rock can be any type, right? It can be igneous rock which breaks down. Even a sedimentary rock also undergoes erosion. अगर igneous erosion हो सकता है, sedimentary और easily हो जाएगा. Metamorphic rocks also undergoes weathering and erosion. All these sediments are carried and they are deposited and gets hardened, and that process is called as lithification. The result is a sedimentary rock. The most characteristic feature of the sedimentary rock is the presence of different layers. Layers are clearly visible because that is how it is formed. Okay, layers are clearly visible. Second, while the rocks are getting formed, it is a very slow process. ऐसा नहीं कि आज deposit हो गया कल rock बन गया. It is a very long process. And during that, various different organisms which have lived on this, some of them are very small, some of them are big. Sometimes sudden deposition happens and they all get buried down. They get buried down, and due to the absence of oxygen, it will not undergo decomposition. They are preserved as it is. Their bodies are preserved as it is. That is what we call it as fossils. Fossils are found within the sedimentary rocks. Sedimentary rocks के अंदर मिलता है. So you don't find fossils in igneous rocks because it is made up of magma. Magma comes from deep inside. वहाँ पर कौन रहता है? Right? As the magma erupts out, it cools down and becomes rocks. There are no fossils in igneous rocks. There are no fossils in metamorphic rocks also. They are present majorly in sedimentary rocks. Fossils are used for studying the Earth's history, geology पढ़ने के लिए तो use होता है. So these are what we call it as sedimentary rocks. Examples: sandstone, limestone, shale rocks. You can clearly identify them by their texture, overall appearance itself. So this is what we can clearly see, the presence of different layers. Okay, large basin over a long period of time, it has hardened to become a rock. पूरा के पूरा sedimentary layers in a large layer. These are different types of sedimentary rocks. ठीक है? So is that clear? So write about this. हो सकता है, हो सकता है. Depends upon the aquarium, कौन रखा है. ठीक है. So river के side में usually sedimentary rocks मिलता है. Sometimes metamorphic rocks are also there. Sometimes precious stones भी मिलता है. So identify करना मुश्किल है. ठीक है. Sedimentary rocks. The sedimentary rocks are formed by the solidification of sediments of original igneous or metamorphic or another sedimentary rock. Another sedimentary rock. Next paragraph. Stages in the formation of a sedimentary rock. First, degradation. That is breakdown of original rock. Through weathering and erosion. and erosion. Second, transportation. By different agents such as wind, water, glacier, etc. Wind, water, glacier, etc. Third, deposition. In a basin. Deposition in a basin. Fourth, lithification. Lithification. That is conversion of loose sediments. Conversion of loose sediments into hard rocks. Loose sediments into hard rocks. In that first one, compaction. लिथिफिकेशन के अंदर पहले compaction, where the sediments are squeezed, by the weight of overlying layers, of sediments. Overlying layers of sediments. Second, cementation. That is binding together of compacted sediments by natural cementing material. Such as silt. Next paragraph. Sedimentary rocks are formed in different layers or strata. They are formed in different layers or strata. Full stop. They contain fossil evidences. Examples of sedimentary rocks. बताइए कौन सा है? Sandstone. So sandstone is particularly common in this part of India, the northern plains. Okay, they are basically the sedimentary plains. In some regions it hardens and forms sandstone. Which color of sandstone? Red sandstone. Okay, so you will see many monuments made up of red sandstone here. The Red Fort or even Qutub Minar. Okay, all these are made up of red sandstone. Okay, northern plains, a plain area, sedimentary deposition has happened over a long period of time. In some regions it has formed sedimentary rocks. Next one, limestone. Shale. 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 chalk, chalk, clay, clay, coal, gypsum, gypsum. These are all the examples of sedimentary rocks. The last one, metamorphic rocks. What do you mean by metamorphism? Metamorphism means changing its nature. So metamorphic rocks are basically those rocks which are originally different rocks, but their nature has changed. For example, let's say there is a igneous rock. An igneous rock is formed, let's say, on the surface. It's an extrusive igneous rock. Over a period of time, this land undergoes subsidence. What do you mean by subsidence? Niche jana, going down. Okay, various different forces act inside and they causes the land subsidence. So gradually these rocks get buried. It undergoes subsidence and it gets buried. After a long period of time, maybe it has come towards the lower levels. The same rock has got buried into the deeper levels. Now the temperature and the pressure conditions which were near to the surface, that has changed. At the lower level, temperature is higher, pressure is higher. Sometimes the minerals of these rocks also get activated at high temperature. So what exactly is rock? It is made up of different minerals. It will not melt completely. For melting we need very high temperature. But because of higher temperature and higher pressure conditions, its nature changes. Sometimes it gets compressed. There is only physical change. Chemically same composition to same hai, it is just getting compressed. Sometimes the chemical composition also changes, because at higher temperature some of the minerals, they become very active, fluid type हो जाते हैं, they get rearranged. Within these ऐसे separate layers बन जाते हैं. Color is clearly becomes visible. Separate bands are formed. Some minerals which are active, they get separated and form separate layers within the rock. They are just getting rearranged. They are not completely melting. Such kind of changes are called as metamorphism. They are due to either change in pressure conditions or change in temperature conditions. Change in pressure condition causes dynamic metamorphism. It's called as dynamic measurement. Pressure ज़्यादा हो गया तो दब जाता है. It get compressed or elongated like this. Dynamic metamorphism. Change in temperature condition causes thermal metamorphism. Okay, it will reorganize some of the minerals within the rocks. Rocks तो overall ऐसे ही रहेगा, उसके अंदर थोड़ा सा reorganization हो गया. Together it is thermodynamic metamorphism, which is usually observed. We don't observe dynamic and thermal separately. We observe the thermodynamic metamorphism in large scale. So for example, rocks of peninsular plateau. The peninsular plateau, the rocks are very old rocks. It is said that they belong to, many of them belong to Archean. Archean time का भी पुराना है. Himalayas are formed in the recent times. The northern plains are formed much more recent times. The very oldest rocks of India are peninsular rocks. So over a period of time they get buried, they get uplifted and buried continuously to chalta hai. So they get metamorphosed. We have large quantity of metamorphic rocks in the peninsular regions. Okay, we can clearly identify them. So this process of change in the rocks which we observe, that is what we call it as metamorphism, and the resultant is metamorphic rocks. So when they undergo metamorphism, The most commonly visible changes which we observe are the changes in the overall physical property or the changes in the chemical composition. Okay, let's say this is the original rock. You can see original rock here. Let's say it is a igneous rock, intrusive igneous hai. You can clearly see the crystals, crystalline structure, and this is undergoing compression. It is getting compressed in this direction. Okay, इसका equivalent यहाँ पर एक rabbit दिखाया देखो. So when it gets compressed, you can see the entire rock is compressed, and these crystals they are also have become flattened. As they become flattened because of change in the temperature condition, वो भी activate हो जाएगा ना. They get aligned in a plane. Can you see? एक plane में align होता है. ये rabbit देखो ऐसे पूरा flat हो गया. So दब गया. So during the process of metamorphism, some of the minerals get activated and they get aligned in a particular plane. This process is called as foliation. It's called as foliation. Foliation is part of metamorphism. Foliation is very clearly visible in many of the rocks. You take a metamorphic rock, if you identify separate dark and light bands, dark and light bands दिखता है. That means it has undergone foliation. In some cases it won't undergo foliation. Okay, the pressure has acted in such a manner that these minerals get activated and they get aligned in lines. Separate lines बन जाते हैं, which we call it as lineation. देखो rabbit देखो. Foliation and lineation are part of metamorphism. Okay, इतना याद रखो काफी है, और डिटेल में जरूरी नहीं. Foliation, lineation are associated with which type of rocks? Metamorphic rocks. Simple. Okay, how to identify the foliation and lineation? This is a non-foliated rocks. Okay, non-foliated quartz rock है. This is lineation quartz. Lineation हुआ है. This is non-foliation, non-lineation है. Lineation हुआ तो you can clearly see these lines. Okay, ऐसे ऐसे lines देखो, clearly visible है. That is what is lineation. This is the result of metamorphism. This is foliation. Can you identify these bands? Dark and light bands. In a particular plane they are arranged. Okay, dark and light bands, you can clearly see this. This is foliation. Fine, it's part of metamorphism. Okay, so we need to talk about specific examples, we'll talk about that. So write about this. It involves change in the form of rocks. Change in the form of rocks through physical or chemical processes. Change in the form of rocks through physical or chemical processes. Stop. Changes in pressure conditions. Changes in pressure conditions result in dynamic metamorphism. Dynamic metamorphism. Changes in temperature result in thermal metamorphism. Thermal metamorphism. Together it causes thermodynamic metamorphism. Thermodynamic metamorphism. Next paragraph. During the process of metamorphism, if the minerals get arranged, in a series of bands, during the process of metamorphism, if the minerals get arranged in a series of bands along a plane, it is called as foliation. Foliation involves banding. What is banding? Arrangement of bands is banding. So next, lineation. When minerals are arranged in linear manner, it causes lineation. Examples इंपॉर्टेंट है, इसके ऊपर डायरेक्ट क्वेश्चन आ सकते हैं. So I told you granite is a igneous rock. Which type of igneous rock? Intrusive igneous rock. So there are higher chances that the granite becomes metamorphic rock. Intrusive है, अंदर है, temperature pressure तो change होगा कभी भी. So what is the metamorphic rock of granite? Metamorphic form of granite, anyone? Okay, it's called as gneiss. Gneiss is metamorphic form of granite. What about limestone? Marble, which we use again for flooring, it's a metamorphic rock. That is why it is stronger. Marble is the metamorphic form of limestone. Sandstone, quartzite. Quartzite is the metamorphic rock of sandstone. Shale, schist. Clay, slate. Coal, graphite, as well as diamond. ठीक है, that is what is metamorphism. So in a way our UPSC preparation is also metamorphism. So originally all of us were different rocks, some primary, some sedimentary. So रुक जाइए, एक और टॉपिक है, 5 मिनट रुक जाइए, खत्म कर लेते हैं रॉक्स. देखिए, so over a period of time, high temperature, high pressure will change the nature. So most probably in terms of for good. Okay. Okay, what we learn here, it will change us for good. So this is one of the most important part of your learning. Learning time का most important part है. Okay, make use of it for good. The last part is rock cycle. Rock cycle. So I told you that an igneous rock is always formed from magma. Right? So we identify three categories of rocks. One is igneous rock. Second one is sedimentary rock. Third one is metamorphic rock. We have three types of rocks. And this is what is surface. Okay, let's say this is surface. Above the surface, below the surface. Those igneous rocks which are formed above the surface, extrusive igneous rocks. Those which are formed below the surface is intrusive igneous rocks. But both are formed from magma. Sedimentary rock will become rock only when it gets buried below the surface. Surface के ऊपर है तो बस खाली sediments ही रहेगा. It is just soil. It has to get buried under high pressure. It gets converted into sedimentary rocks. Much more higher pressure, it becomes a metamorphic rock. ठीक है? What are the process which are converting this one type of rocks into another type? Magma cools down to form igneous rock. The process is cooling. Once there is an igneous rock, it gets uplifted to become an outcrop. Outcrop मैंने बताया था जो बाहर मतलब ऊपर है, ridge or a mountain. That is what is an outcrop. When it gets uplifted, the internal forces pushing it upwards, it becomes an outcrop. An outcrop undergoes weathering, erosion, transportation and deposition of sediments, and when these sediments undergoes burial, compaction and cementation, it becomes a sedimentary rock. ठीक है, sedimentary rock बन गया. So let's say this undergoes further deeper burial causing change in the temperature and pressure, it becomes a metamorphic rocks. If metamorphic rocks undergoes melting, becomes magma, magma cool होके igneous rock बनेगा. Can you see they are continuously changing from one form to another form? There are also internal connections between them. An igneous rock can undergo burial to become a metamorphic rock. If it gets buried, it becomes a metamorphic rock. One metamorphic rock undergo further burial and become another metamorphic rock. Change in the condition causes another metamorphic rock. A metamorphic rock can get uplifted and gets eroded and become another sedimentary rock. Right? Or one sedimentary rock may get uplifted and become another sedimentary rock. This continuous change is what we call it as the rock cycle, the cyclical changes. Okay, no need of any dictation, you just have to write this. Okay, एक flow chart बना दो, हो गया. That is our topic of types of rocks. A simple flow chart would be sufficient here. Outcrop is basically any elevated part of the land. If the land is totally flat, if it is totally plain region, the wind will not be able to erode it faster. If it is a kind of elevated part, the moving winds will break it down faster. In the same way, the precipitation also, while flowing down on this, it erodes it faster. So that elevated part, the exposed part is called as outcrop. Like a small hill or a ridge or a mountain, all of these what we call it as outcrop. Outcrops undergo faster weathering, breakdown, erosion, etc. Artificial conditions है? नहीं, उसका mineral composition तो same ही रहेगा. Will not be able to change the mineral composition, right? We can make it slightly stronger, but it requires too much of heat. It requires too much of heat. So rather than supplying that heat, it's better to dig it out from the surface and take it out. You know, it is too energy intensive process. Only under high temperature and high pressure condition it changes artificially. हाँ हाँ दोनों हो जाएगा. मैग्मा तो डायरेक्टली नहीं बनेगा. कोई भी रॉक मैग्मा डायरेक्टली नहीं बनेगा. फर्स्ट इट बिकम्स अ मेटामॉर्फिक रॉक unless it is coming in direct contact with another magma itself. Okay, magma is coming in large scale and that is melting the rocks, then only it melts completely. Just because of burial, it will not become magma. First, it gets converted into metamorphic rocks, then it completely melts through deeper burial. So we have covered two topics today: the interior of the earth and the types of rocks. So please try to cover it from NCERT. 11th standard NCERT, it is given. Okay, try to read it once, पूरा topic खत्म हो जाएगा. In the next class, we'll cover the earth's movements, different types of movements, endogenetic, exogenetic, diastrophic, sudden, etc. So you can read that also and come. ठीक है, thank you.